Today we're here in the depths of the Argonne forest to explore the place where the Lost Battalion was trapped and cut off by German forces during the Great War. The Lost Battalion is the name given to men of the US 77th Division who launched an attack here into the Argonne forest in October 1918. During that attack they became isolated and were trapped here on the side of this hill where we are right now, in what is going to be called the Pocket. This is where the Lost Battalion found themselves. The men were going to be led by Major Charles W. Whittlesey, and on the 2nd of October he led his men on an attack into the forest here. They were supported by their French on the left and other American divisions on their right hand side. His men made good headway, advancing forwards into this area. Unfortunately, his flanks, both left and right, had been stalled by German counterattacks. Without this knowledge, Whittlesey and his men pushed forwards beyond their own line. That was going to lead to them being cut off in this area here that was going to become known as the Pocket of the Lost Battalion. For 6 days they were going to be surrounded by enemy here, suffering horrible losses whilst they fought for their lives. So we've just now come to an area that is a little bit east of Binaville, and I hope I've said that right. I apologise if I haven't. Roughly in this area here is where Whittlesey and his men would have launched their attack from into the Argonne forest. So on the morning of the 2nd of October, about 7 AM, the attack was launched. As they moved forwards, Whittlesey ordered companies D and F to maintain the western side of the ridge. They were going to stay there as a containing force whilst the rest of the men moved forwards. The idea being that they were going to move along this ridge that was known as Hill 198. As they got forwards, they turned slightly and moved up the side of that hill. The idea being that once they got there and held their position, they would send back companies E and H to connect with D and F to then hold a line across the ridge there. The problem was they were going to run into a double German trench, so 2 lines of trench, real strong protection on the hill there. They had to start really fighting their way forwards as they turned slightly to their right hand side and moved up the side of the hill. So from here we're going to move forwards to the place kind of in the ravine further ahead of us here where the Lost Battalion had moved forwards to by this stage. So when you come to this area today, they actually have this signpost that marks the position where the Lost Battalion was, just down this ridge right here. Now, this was the one small advantage that the men of the 77th did have. You can see this ravine drops down very steeply, and the German positions were further up the ridge in this direction. This ridgeline gave them a little bit of protection. Artillery coming in from the Germans, or even grenades or projectiles as they got closer, they had a little bit of protection along this ridgeline right here. Okay, so we're going to try and make our way down here and see if we can actually see some of the positions where these guys were dug in. Now, when you see movies of the Lost Battalion, it does not do justice to just how steep this ridgeline is. So this is going to be interesting to see if we can get down here in one piece, but we're going to try. Now, for you guys who've seen the movie The Lost Battalion, one thing which I don't think that movie quite depicts is just how steep this ridge is. So up the top here is the road line where we were stood just a short while ago, and you can see how steep this is. It really drops off, and in fact getting down here nearly had a couple of accidents, but we managed to make it down. By the evening of the 2nd October, the men here had made some great advances, with men of the 77th making their way up the right of Hill 198. Unfortunately, whilst that was happening, the Germans had pushed large counter-offensives through the flanks of the 77th against both the French and the Americans to their left and right-hand side. That left Captain Whittlesey's men in this position here on the hillside, the area that was going to become known as the pocket of the Lost Battalion. Of course, Captain Whittlesey wasn't aware of this at this stage. He'd sent a runner back to make contact with the other men to bring them forwards. A runner had also been sent forwards from that position to warn Whittlesey that the Americans were cutting off the flanks. Neither of those runners made it through. Captain Whittlesey got his men to dig in on this hillside here. During the afternoon of the 3rd of October, the Germans launched a heavy attack against the men here dug in on this ridge. They had the high ground, and yet the Americans managed to hold on. They took heavy casualties, but eventually managed to push the Germans back to their original position further up the ridge. By the morning of the 4th of October, Whittlesey still had not heard from any of the runners he had sent out, and he was starting to worry whether or not the carrier pigeons with messages that he had sent had reached their destination. Whittlesey still believed firmly that his orders to hold this position stood. While some of his men were questioning should they retreat back, should they move, Whittlesey was determined that they were going to hold this ground right here. Things were about to get worse for the Americans when they came under artillery fire from their own artillery. Now, there's much controversy and questions around how this happened. It's been suggested that maybe Whittlesey sent the wrong coordinates with one of the carrier pigeons for his exact position. It's also believed possibly that maybe the artillery got the coordinates wrong. Most likely is that they believed that Whittlesey's men were on the south bank of this ravine, the area you can see on the far side just here. In reality, they had advanced down through the ravine to the north slope that we're stood on right now. The American artillery was coming down directly on them, causing huge casualties, and in fact most of the casualties here in the pocket were caused by the American artillery. This was a dire situation here, so Captain Whittlesey got their last carrier pigeon, a pigeon by the name of Cher Ami, and he wrote this message: "We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." That pigeon was launched up into the air, but the Germans realised the importance of carrier pigeons and opened fire to try to shoot the bird out of the air. It was hit and flopped back down briefly. You can imagine the panic that the men had when they saw that happen. But the pigeon took flight again and managed to succeed in delivering its message. That then stopped the American artillery barrage and saved countless lives of the men who were stuck here in the pocket. Now, of course, the good news is that the shelling stopped here. The bad news was that the Germans took full advantage of that. They knew the Americans were going to be in a bad way after that barrage coming down straightly on them, so they launched another attack straight through the woods here from the top of the ridge. After more losses and brutal hand-to-hand combat, by some miracle the Americans managed to push the Germans back to the top of the ridge again. You can imagine by this stage morale was low. There were so many wounded here, sickness was setting in, and this was becoming a dire situation. From the 5th to the 8th of October, the Germans launched further attacks down onto the ridge here. They also sent forward a message with a prisoner who'd been captured by them earlier in the fighting here, and they sent the American back forward to the line demanding the surrender, but the Americans ignored those messages and held strong in this position. So as you get down here into the ridge, you can really start to see some of the kind of remains of, I would say here, this is a foxhole, and over here to the side of me. I don't know how well this comes out on camera, but I would say that this is definitely a dugout foxhole position as well. There's another one just up there above me, and in fact there's a couple of larger ones all the way down the bank here below me. News of the Lost Battalion here had reached all the way to the top of American command, and the 28th Infantry Division were pushed through to launch a heavy offensive into this area to try to reach Whittlesey's men. Eventually, on the 8th of October, they broke through the lines to the south of here and broke in to the pocket, to the Lost Battalion. So before we continue telling the rest of the story of the Lost Battalion, I've just taken a second to come over here to the monument for the Lost Battalion. This is just here kind of at the end of the valley, so just down here along this ridge line is where we were, looking at the foxholes and the places where the guys were dug in. So here we have the monument. There's some interesting information over here on the plaque. It includes the pictures of some of the men who were awarded the Medal of Honor. We've already talked about some of these men: Charles Whittlesey, George McMurtry, Nelson Haldeman, but others as well. So Goetler and Bleckley are both people who feature in my video at the Meuse Argonne American Cemetery, and we also have the two other Medal of Honor recipients here, Benjamin Kaufman and Archie A. Peck. Something which fascinated me here is they have a picture on the day that the Lost Battalion survivors came out of the pocket, a picture of the survivors. I mean, that's incredible. I actually didn't even know that picture existed until I saw it here. But this is the monument to the Lost Battalion. Of the over 500 men who entered this area of woods, only 194 were going to walk out of here again. The rest being killed, wounded or missing here on the ridge in the Argonne forest. Major Charles W. Whittlesey, along with Captain George G. McMurtry and Captain Nelson M. Haldeman, were going to be awarded the Medals of Honor for the actions that they did whilst they were here in this piece of forest. We're going to talk a lot more about Major Whittlesey in the next video here on the channel, so make sure you stick around for that one. I hope you guys enjoyed this story, taking a look at the place of the Lost Battalion. I personally found it fascinating walking this ground and seeing the foxhole and trying to think about what the men here endured. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.